what are some of the top things that are going on in our life that would cause somebody to prematurely age? So let's talk about the things that both first, quote unquote, harm or have a negative impact, lifestyle factors, etc. Then we'll talk about the things that start to take us in a different direction. But yeah, give us a few things that are on the top negative impact on having us prematurely age.
Well, I'm not sure if I would want to say this is a rank order, meaning that I necessarily have the priorities 1 through 10 exactly right. But here's my list that I would kind of speculate on. I think first on the list would be exposure to toxins. And these are, the hard things sometimes to understand, like heavy metals, lead, cadmium, arsenic, aluminum, mercury. These are things that as the body builds up exposure, it starts to have kind of a silent adverse impact on both our nervous system and our immune systems. And by the way, our nervous and immune systems are intimately interconnected. It's almost a neuroimmune system as one system. And so toxins, which can come from all sorts of things, from exposure to air, exposure to water, exposure to food, exposure even to drugs, can be seen as what we call xenobiotics, or toxic substances that can mark our genes epigenetically. This work was first done, I saw, by Moshe Sev at McGill University in Quebec, Canada, in which he showed that certain pharmaceuticals actually can cause epigenetic modulation of the immune system and produce immune aging. And this is why some drugs end up increasing the risk of autoimmune disease, because they actually mark the genes in such a way as to increase inflammation in those individuals.
They can damage our cells, damage our mitochondria, and that has a whole cascading of effects.
Precisely. So that would be one.
And toxins are generally every year are increasing more in the environment and our exposure as human beings. Is that a fair statement?
Yes. And I just read an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association last week that was actually quite alarming, in which the Food and Drug Administration, and working with the EPA, had just defined a class of toxic molecules, pollutants, that they called forever chemicals. Mm-hmm. Now, what does that mean? It means they can't find a way that they're broken down. There is no organism, no bacteria that seems to eat them up, and therefore they stick around forever. And what are these? These are polyfluoro compounds that came from the relics of Teflon. And they're in our environment probably forever, and they get bioconcentrated in organisms. And they are directly related, according to this report that was just published by the government, to a whole host of diseases, everything from arthritis to inflammatory bowel disease to dementia. So these are silent problems that we often don't even know about, because they just slip into our body and they stick around and accumulate for a long period of time. So that would be one category.
Random fact on that, just to toss in the mix.
Please.
I saw an article the other day that said that if you cook with nonstick cookware like a Teflon pan and it has a crack in it, that crack leads to thousands of microplastic particles and other forever chemicals that you're constantly getting exposed to because you've now damaged the top layer, not to mention the fact of what is the normal contamination that just comes from using it. A good reminder to just use, stainless steel or cast iron pans as a way to protect your body and your brain from some of these toxins.
Thank you. Really, really great pin to put in that one. Absolutely.
Okay, so number one was toxins, not necessarily in that order, but that's the first one you mentioned. What's something else that's out there in our environment, a lifestyle factor that prematurely ages us?
Okay. Number two, which actually relates to number one, is dysbiosis. Now, what is dysbiosis? When I hear that word, when I say it, I have this reflection back to 1985, which seems like eons ago. 1985 was the first year when I was giving seminars to doctors back in the early 80s, where I talked about leaky gut and dysbiosis and the relationship to what we now call the microbiome. And back then, we didn't call it the microbiome. We call it the enteric bacteria. But the living critters that live in our digestive tract, which can be several pounds in weight, and they can be actually one of the larger organs of our body that are actually not connected to the body by the bloodstream, but they're connected to the body through the absorption of the debris from those bacteria in our intestines into our blood through the leaky gut, through the thin lining of our intestinal tract, which is a barrier to prevent the leakage and exposure to these chemicals that come from our microbiome, these living critters in our intestinal tract. And it turns out that the concept that we talked about, dysbiosis, is when the microbiome, these bacteria that live in our gut, some literally hundreds of different species of bacteria, go rogue, and they start being more toxic in terms of their particular activity in the intestinal tract. And there are three really kind of families of bacteria live in our intestinal tract, three kind of categories. One are called the symbiotic bacteria. And those are kind of friendly. And they produce favorable things like vitamins, and they produce trophic factors that are activating our immune system. So those are good. Then we have commensals. Those are bacteria that live in our intestinal tract that don't hurt us, but they don't really help us. They just take up real estate. So they're kind of like just there. And
they don't help us that we know of yet.
That's right. Thank you. That's a good way of saying it. And then the third category are the ones that we're really worried about. They're the toxic bacteria, Salmonella and various species of Listeria and Shigella, and I mean all sorts of different kinds of bacteria that actually produce toxic secondary metabolites that can actually be injurious to our body and our nervous system. Now, just to give a factoid, a lot of people don't recognize this, but the numbers of bacteria we're talking about are fairly extraordinary. In 1 gram of stool, there are more bacteria than there are stars in the known universe. So we're talking about, they're little in size, but there are a lot of them. And they have their own DNA, and they have their own personalities and their own metabolism. And just like every cell in the body, they produce waste products. Some of those waste products might be considered good for us, like prebiotics. Other waste products might be bad for us, like toxins that come out of the metabolism of the amino acid tryptophan that become toxic to our immune system and our nervous system. And so if you actually look at a healthy individual and look at the bacteria in their intestinal tract, you'll find that about 80% of those bacteria are that of the symbiotic type, the friendly type. About 20% or about 15% are of the commensal type, and about 5% or less are of the toxic type. But in a case where a person has dysbiosis, that percentage of those not friendly types, the toxic types, increases and the friendly types decrease. So this is another major contributor to a burden, a stress factor on our immune system and our nervous system. And remember that the gut is the second brain because it's directly connected to the brain through the vagus nerve, one of the spinal nerves, the major nerves. So your brain is talking to your gut is talking to the brain, and they're both talking to the immune system. So it's all interconnected, the gut microbiome, the brain, and the immune system.
And adding that last piece, which is then connect that back to the longevity and the aging piece, when we have something like leaky gut, when we have something like dysbiosis, the wrong types of the good bacteria that we want, too much of the bad, not enough of the good, how is that connected to prematurely aging us?
Yeah, thank you. So that has been a real frontier of research the last 10 years, that what you just described. And I think it's very fascinating to watch how this field is evolving. And I say that because in 1985, when we first started talking about this to doctors, we were criticized pretty significantly by gastroenterologists, by immunologists, by neurologists. They basically said, no, you're making the story up. This doesn't really exist. This is just fabrication, and you shouldn't be saying this to doctors. It's not factually correct. I'm very pleased to say, however, over the last 30 years, things have changed quite dramatically. And now it's a product of literally hundreds of papers in the peer-reviewed scientific literature. And every major medical center has got research going on in this area. And leaky gut is now a term that you find used in the traditional medicine all the time. So
because they saw the gut as more of an isolated thing, that it didn't have impact on the body, which, by the way, people tend to look, and you've outlined this so well in your book, Disease Dissolution, that we often see these organ systems as separate things instead of the fact that they're deeply interconnected.
Thank you. I think that's a really important takeaway from this discussion, that you can never isolate one organ system from the body and talk about it in isolation and understand how it's really affecting a person's health. You've got to think of it in terms of its interconnection, because every part of our body is interconnected through the nervous system and the immune system. In fact, if you ask the question, what are the three places that speak to the outside world on our inside body 24/7, 365? There are only three places. That's the nervous system, obviously, through the sensual perceptions that we're taking in. They are the immune system, which is constantly sampling the outside environment to tell the inside body what to do. And they're the mucosal immune system microbiome that sits on the surface of our respiratory tissues, like our lungs and our nasal pharynx, or it sits on our GI mucosa. That's constantly sampling the outside world, telling the inside body how it should behave. And those all cross-communicate. They're all interwoven together. So this concept of why does our body sometimes seems like it's reacting against it? It's actually reacting against what it perceives in the outside world as being an offender. And it's doing what it's really supposed to do. It should mount a defense against what it considers to be an offender. The problem is often it overreacts, or it's not balanced in its reaction. And now you have bystander injury, which is us. We start to be damaged by our own immune system that's really trying to defend us from what it perceives to be a foreigner.
So connecting the dots there on the last question that we had, I was asking that how is it that the degradation of our gut and dysbiosis can prematurely age us? And what I'm hearing from you is that when our gut, which is really our barrier, our defense system, it's where the outside world comes into the inside. It's one of those three points of contact. If that's degraded, if that's beaten down, if that's really torn down so much so that your body cannot set up its defense systems, you're going to have an onslaught of things in kind of a couple main areas. Number one, a lot of more pathogenic things are going to be able to enter into your body, including viruses, other bacteria, etc. So your body has to constantly be in fight mode against those. And number two, there's the potential for confusion within your body where your body can start to attack itself.
That's really well said. And I think it's that last one that you mentioned that's probably for many people a little bit confusing, because some of these things that are produced by our gut microbiome, all these critters that live in our intestinal tract, if they're absorbed into our blood so they get exposed to our immune system, can look like things that are naturally occurring in our immune system that cause the immune system to control its function. This is called molecular mimicry.
Wasn't there a paper that just came out about this topic? I mean, I've known about it for a while, but was there something that recently was in the literature that came out on this?
Yes. It's been found that this molecular mimicry may explain some of the aspects that people have of intolerance to grains that's not strictly gluten intolerance. It's related to other kind of principles that may be in hybridized grains as we've changed the way we breed seeds to make high-yielding crops. We get other things than just gluten. We get other new variant forms of molecules that may have, when eaten, molecular mimicry with other signaling pathways within our immune system that cause the body to react to it as if it were a dangerous substance. So I think this whole field of how our body can be fooled by things coming into it from the outside that have this mimicry influence on our immune system and our nervous system is a really rapidly advancing thing that takes us beyond food allergy, because this is not an allergic reaction. This is more an immunotoxic reaction.
And that's one of the reasons that we're seeing these explosive rates of autoimmune conditions.
Yes, that's exactly right.
Can you give us some of the top line numbers just so people understand how big this is? I think is it like 80 million people are suffering from autoimmune conditions? A huge percentage of them being women, especially. But it's kind of a real epidemic in the way that we're talking about an epidemic.
Yeah, I would even be so bold as to say it's a pandemic, because I wrote an article when SARS-CoV-2 started to be seen early on as this COVID epidemic or pandemic, and it became later, when I said that I think this is a pandemic laid on top of a pandemic. I think we already had a pandemic of chronic immunological imbalance upon which then the SARS-CoV-2 virus then just aggravated to produce a new pandemic on a pandemic. Now we got this explosive problem with people that had compromised immune function being the people that most got sick the worst and many who died. It's very interesting when you think of it that the same virus in some people was no worse than a common cold, and other people caused them to die. Now, why was that? It had to do with the way that the immune system responded to that same signal, that virus, based upon the principle and status of the immune system, which in many people was far less than what it needed to be resilient.
So let's go back to this list that you were sharing. We covered two. We talked about toxins. We talked about intestinal integrity, leaky gut, dysbiosis, and how the degradation of that can prematurely age us. Is there anything else that you want to add to that list? Things that prematurely age us. Yep. And when we look around, again, aging is going to be a part of life, but we're looking for really a healthy aging, which actually in this world, you have to go kind of far and wide to find. There's not that many examples of people that are healthy aging in a way where it actually looks like maybe they've slowed down the aging process, but really they've tapped into the body's innate potential. So anything else you want to add on that list?
So I think we're on a roll here. So we started off with toxic chemicals. Then we went to a toxic gut with dysbiosis. Now how about toxic thoughts and toxic experiences? A lot of people don't put that in the field of toxins, but they're just as toxic.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah. I mean, if you are feeling at risk as a human being, if you feel unsupported, if you feel like you've been psychologically or physically abused or injured, your body has a response to that as well. Your immune system responds, your nervous system responds. So sometimes it's hard to actually tell the difference between what the source of toxins are, whether it was a chemical, whether it was dysbiosis, or whether it was thoughts, attitudes, beliefs, and experience. They all activate and are regulating the same principles of immunological challenge. And everyone would say, oh yeah, stress affects my immune system. I'm more likely to get a cold when I'm a student if I have to take tests at exam time. Well, that's a small little part of the more broad story. Think of, let's go to Ukraine. Think of kids in Ukraine and the effect that constant fear they has on their epigenetics of their immune system. And then the question is, well, can you measure that? Or is this just, Jeff, some kind of flight of fancy you're speculating on? Well, Rachel Yehuda, you probably have spoken of her work. She's a psychiatrist in the medical school at New York University Medical School, highly acclaimed for her work. He's done many things, but one that's, I think, really relative to this discussion is she measured the immune age and epigenetics of second-generation Holocaust victims. And what she found was that the epigenetic imprinting of second generation, these are children of Holocaust victims, was marked in such a way that they had inherited a stress response that was already putting them in a kind of a post-traumatic stress situation with regard to their stress hormones. This was already a legacy that was imprinting their genes in such a way that they were carrying that legacy of memory from their parents.
Wow.
So let me give you another example that may be a little less dramatic, but still quite significant. So up in northern Canada, about 5 years ago, there was a really horrible winter, tremendous cold snap. It was more than a snap. It was a cold period that caused huge power outages. It was called the Great Ice Storm. And many people were without power in really sub-zero temperatures for weeks because the power was out. And during that period of time, some women got pregnant and probably darkened at home under the blankets trying to keep warm. And so then they made the decision that they would take a look at the genes of their children. And they found out that, lo and behold, there was an epigenetic mark on their children of the trauma that their mother had experienced while she was pregnant with them in utero on their epigenomes that were tying them into a stress pattern. They were already stressed, and it was epigenetically linked. So these experiences that we have in our lives can be toxic, and they can mark our epigenome in such a way as to regulate our nervous and immune system function. Now, the good news is, and this is, I'm sounding like doom and gloom here, everything that I've spoken about is a two-way street. That's the big news. It's not a one-way street. It's not like, oh boy, once this happened, my life is over. I've got this mark on my genes from my experience. I didn't even fill out an application card. It just happened. Woe is me. No, now we know there are ways that you can turn it back the other direction. And that's what we've been really focusing our attention on, because that's the process of immune rejuvenation, right? From immune senescence to immune rejuvenation. And we now know there are biological mechanisms by which our body can do that. It's not a one-way street. So I think we've got these bad news stories, but we've also got the good news stories that if we practice the right things, we can move this street the other direction.
Would you add to that list foods, right? You talked about general toxins that are environmental toxins. You added in the component of leaky gut, which so directly is linked to, of course, food. But does food deserve its own category? And if so, what are some of the top foods or food categories that prematurely age us?
Okay, so let's first, obviously your answer, is correct. Yes, is the answer. But let's first talk about foods that prematurely age the immune system. And then, let's talk about foods that do the opposite, that are involved with immunorejuvenation.
We'll get to the good news first. Yeah. We'll get to the good news second.
Okay. So the one that comes right out at the tip of the mountains here, it's visible above everything, are foods that enhance the poor control of sugar in our body. So any kind of diet that then enhances our mishandling of what we call glucose, which is a sugar, that then damages both our immune system. It damages virtually every cell in our body. If we have too high a sugar floating around, can be injured and can be prematurely aged. And these are called advanced glycosylation end products. Now, think, if you would, what that acronym is. Advanced glycosylation end products, AGE, right?
Right.
Now, what happens when you have sugar reacting with our body in such a way to produce these AGEs, these advanced glycosylation end products? They then bind to receptors in our immune system that are called receptors of advanced glycosylation end products. Now, what's the acronym there? RAGE. Our body is enraged when we are having too much sugar that damages our cells. And I think this is a very, very powerful concept, because enraged means that we're in a state of inflammation. And inflammation, where is the origin of inflammation? Our immune system. When our immune system is imbalanced, we are enraged because we're activating these processes of inflammation.
It's pretty mind-blowing. And there's a few things there that I want to pull apart just to make sure that everybody has it. When you're talking about sugar, you're talking about anything that turns into sugar inside of the body. So that's sometimes added sugar from the foods that people are eating. And a lot of the processed foods that we have today have added sugar to them. But we're also talking about diets that have high amounts of refined carbohydrates, which also turn into sugar. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And so with both of those items, is there a way that, one of the things that I've found is that most people are not great at understanding how much sugar they're taking in between both of those two categories. It's kind of like if you go to Times Square and you ask people, random person, do they eat healthy? Everybody has a different definition of what healthy looks like. And most people are going to say yes, because for one person, it's like 5 Coca-Colas a day. For another person, it's only 1 pack of cigarettes a week, whatever it might be, right? Are there ways that people, just like you were talking about methylation testing for aging, what are some of the biomarkers that people can look at within themselves to see how far on the spectrum are they? Are there things that you pay attention to or that you look at, or when you're educating doctors, as you've done for many years now, that are a good measure of how we are on that spectrum of where our sugar intake is?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm really excited, and I know you've spoken about this quite a bit in your podcast and discussions with consumers, health consumers, around the revolution that's occurring with glucose monitoring, the so-called CGMs, continuous glucose monitoring, these devices you put on your skin that then measure your blood sugar throughout the day and can track how your blood sugar is influenced by what you're doing. Sometimes it's not necessarily by just what we're eating, but it may be by your exercise, or it may be by stress, or it may be by sleep, that you can start examining how all those things influence your blood sugar. What we do know, as you just said, is that diets that deliver readily available sugar to the body, that could either be sugar directly or quickly metabolized refined starch, will elevate your blood sugar in such a way that it makes too much sugar available for cells, and your body has to find a way to put it. So it just sticks that sugar onto things like proteins, and that's what we call advanced glycosylation end products. And once you do that, once you stick a sugar molecule onto a protein in your body, like to make glycosylated hemoglobin, or people have heard about A1C. What is A1C? A1C stands for glycosylated hemoglobin. And it's where your body had too much sugar, so it stuck that sugar onto a protein in your blood, which is hemoglobin. And the higher the level percent of your hemoglobin that's got that sugar attached to it, the more problem your body had in managing sugar, and the more you are on risk to diabetes. And so we now talk about getting your A1C down below 5.5% and, getting it close to 5%. People at 7% are people that are already in the diabetic range because they are not managing their sugar well. And it is now starting to produce an adverse effect, not just on hemoglobin, but on all body proteins, can be then glucose containing proteins by this process. Now, why is that of concern? It's of concern because once you've taken a protein that your body makes, like let's take the most common protein that floats around in your blood that your body needs for its daily function. That's called albumin. And your major blood protein is called serum albumin. Now, albumin does a really important job because it takes protein around to other cells of your body to deliver nourishment so that they can eat up that albumin and use that protein to make their own structure and function. So albumin is really an important protein for your overall whole body health. Now, what happens if you have too high of sugar in your blood? You don't just put the sugar onto hemoglobin, it also puts it onto albumin. That's called glycosylated albumin. Now, why is that not so good? Because once you've changed albumin from your friendly albumin to a new form of albumin that is this unfriendly glycosylated albumin, now your body recognizes that as a foreigner. And what in your body is there to recognize foreigners? Your immune system. So what do you know about the relationship between poor blood sugar and autoimmune disease? They're related.
Wow.
Because your body now has a foreigner it's being made, that your immune system, and often people say, oh, I have a defective immune system because I have an autoimmunity. No, maybe you have a super active immune system that's even more vigilant in understanding foreigners, and that's why you have an early reaction. And maybe that's why 80% of autoimmune cases are found in women. Women don't have defective immune systems. They have highly sophisticated immune systems because think of what they have to do. They have to have an immune system that can accommodate a foreigner living in their body. Even a foreigner can be the opposite sex. It can be a man. It can be a boy. Think of a woman's immune system having a boy inside her. So she has to have a very, very adept immune system, which makes it very sophisticated, and it may be then much more vulnerable to certain types of mischief that occurs when we start throwing new chemicals like sugar at proteins.
I think this is such an important topic because on the trend of personalization, and personalization can be taken in so many different ways, an important topic that is a topic that's super important for us to talk about is that it does seem that there are a multitude of factors that make women's bodies more impacted when they face stress. And if we don't take in that personalization, then we can't come up with the solutions that biological women need to support their unique body and their unique immune system. And I think it's important to talk about those differences that are there because health sometimes is applied universally. And sure, there's a lot of key themes that are there. But if we don't take into account the different aspects that are there, we may not be servicing women with the exact needs.
Oh boy, I really want to just stand up and shout in support of what you just said. I think it's so important. And it takes us back, again, as a biological scientist, it takes us back even to the way we develop our information. Most all of the studies that have been done for which drug trials are accomplished and ultimately lead to approval are done in males. And why is that? Because females are more complicated. So when you do a clinical study, you want to get rid of a lot of complications. So men are simpler. And so if you really think about all the kind of prescriptions that we have developed based upon clinical trials that lead to drug approvals, they're often not even female-centric at all. They didn't even include women as a major component in the decision-making.
And there was that famous prescription drug that was being tested, and I think women were included and ended up damaging a bunch of unborn babies. And that led to a whole sort of pullback in a good way. But I think now we're coming out of that and saying, how do we really contextualize all health advice? And the thing that I really appreciate is that there's been many individuals that have come on this podcast like yourself who've talked about, okay, great. A little bit of stress is good, but if we are recommending cryotherapy and cold plunge for women 5 days a week, we have to understand that their bodies are different, especially if they're in their prime fertility years. And everybody has to contextualize this based on where they uniquely are.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a really good underlying exclamation point to take away. I often say that we're each unique facet on the diamond of life. And there has never been a facet that's identical to us, nor will there ever be again. And so if we want to really talk about how we make decisions in healthcare, they're generally made on the basis of community or population-based studies. They're not based on individual studies. And so you say, well, isn't there a pretty good correlation between population-based studies and individual needs? Well, on average, yes, there is, but we're not average. Each individual is not average. They are who they are. And so what do we do in medicine? We say, well, that was an unexpected adverse side effect, or that was a non-responder, as if there's something wrong with that person, rather than to say, no, that person is actually unique as a responder. They're not something wrong with them. They're unique in the way they're responding. And the more we actually discover that, and actually there is this whole, I would call it almost a form of using genes as a way of controlling a person's self-perception to think that they're not fully functional because they carry a certain gene that's
using the topic of genes to kind of create a little bit of a victim mentality.
Yeah, well said.
It may be well-intentioned, but it's still victim mentality.
That's exactly right, because genes are there to define our uniqueness. They're not bad genes and good genes. There are genes that define our uniqueness. So if you think that uniqueness is the power of the individual, that's what we want, is uniqueness, then you don't think of genes as something that are bad or good. You think of them as defining our potential.
Mm. One more question about the topic of sugar. Glucose monitors are expensive. They're out of reach for a lot of people. That's why I think it's so important to highlight the lab markers that are there. You mentioned A1C, which is one that a lot of people can get from their doctor, and you put out some ideal ranges. We have a link to, a whole report that we wrote about different ideal ranges for different markers that are there. What about also fasting insulin? We've had many people come on this podcast and say, if there was one test that I could order for my patient to help them get a sense of sort of where their body is, not that medicine is practiced that way, but fasting insulin is up there. Would you put that in that same category as well of something to measure how far along the pathway we've gotten in terms of the balance of having too much sugar or being more in an optimal range?
Yeah, I think fasting insulin is another good biomarker. You have to be a little bit careful because it is a U-shaped curve. It's curvilinear because too little is not so good and too much is not so good. And so you have to ask the question, what is the ideal reference range in the middle of that U? And so, something that's probably above 5 but below 15 or even below 10 is probably using IUs per mil is probably a good range. So you want to look at both too little and too much.
It's interesting. I've heard a lot of people in the space of functional medicine. Again, there's a lot of different ways to slice it, and it's not like you're only looking at that. I've sometimes heard like 2 to 5, could be a range that would be considered optimal. Below, like right around 5 would be considered like in normal, in a better range and like a good range for the general population. But I'm hearing you say that even potentially lower than 5 could be a little too low for some people.
I think that if you chose 5 as a midpoint, that's a pretty good number. But I would not say, okay, I'm at 5, but I want to go down to 2.
Yeah.
Or I'm 5 and it went up to 7. I'm now really worried. I think that you got to have a little understanding of the flexibility of that number because it If you do repetitive fasting insulins on an individual, you will find it will change variably around a certain range.
Got it. Amazing. Well, you were setting us up for, we've covered the things that prematurely age us. Now we're going to go into this topic of what actually can, in a way, when you look at society, it can actually help us slow down what we call modern aging that's there. But to set that conversation up, we have to talk about something that you've mentioned a few times, and it's this idea of immunorejuvenation.
Mm-hmm.
So let's get like I know you can go super deep, and we will, but let's get the high level of immunorejuvenation and why it's an important topic for people to understand.
Yes. So we've said that when immune cells and nervous system tissues get epigenetically injured, that they carry that memory effect. And then it puts those cells in an alarm state. So the immune system gets in an alarm state, the nervous system gets in an alarm state. And what does that really mean? What it means often is you have things like inflammatory disorders. So inflammation becomes the effect of the cause upstream of these epigenetic alterations in your immune and nervous system. And that has a name that's been applied to it called inflammaging. You've probably used that term. Inflammaging. So it's an age-related principle when you're in that chronic simmering inflammatory state. It's not acute inflammation like a fulminant infection. It's just a chronic simmering inflammation at the organ and tissue level. Inflammaging. And its origin is the imbalance of this relationship between the immune and the nervous systems and how that connects with the gut microbiome, the other things that we're talking about. Now, with that in mind, you would say, well, if you're in a state of inflammaging, that must mean that you're carrying bad memories from past experiences that your body holds on to, and it keeps perpetuating that throughout your life, and it maybe just gets worse and worse, and ne'er the well can you ever get better. But now we recognize, as I mentioned, that there are biological processes that actually can turn the curve the other direction. It can get rid of these bad memories, these epigenetic marks, and replace them with new, younger opportunities to be reinitiated to friendly messages. And that is a process that won a Nobel Prize in Medicine and Physiology, actually in 2014, called autophagy. And this process of autophagy and its companion process called mitophagy, the same kind of process going on within mitochondria, the energy powerhouses of cells, is a way that our body kind of garbage collects and gets rid of these messages that may be deleterious or harmful for the long-term best health outcomes of the individual. Now, if autophagy is not as capable as is the damaging process of inflammaging, now you're in a negative spiral, right? You're getting worse. But if you can lower the rate of inflammaging while you're increasing the selective renewal of your immune cells by autophagy, now you have the process of immunorejuvenation. That's the counterpoint to immunosenescence, or aging in the immune system. So this is our light in the dark, that if we can then intervene in ways that can actually recreate the opportunity for our immune system to have lost these bad memories, the bad memories that lock it into a state of inflammaging, now we can actually see forward a lowered biological age and a better health trajectory going forward.
So I think a great way to help us understand how that plays out is we should follow the same sort of listicle idea of what are some of the things that can take advantage of that system of immunorejuvenation that can pull things in a different direction. So if toxins, if intestinal permeability and leaky gut and different foods that are out there and our processed food diet and our modern diet, if those things all contribute to aging and inflammaging, let's go through a list of things that can pull us in the other direction.
Yeah, that's good. So I think the first thing we can say, taking on the theme that we talked about, that glucose, when it's mischievous in our body, is not good, then we say, well, okay, then how do you keep glucose under control? How do you keep blood sugar under control? And you do so by diets that have a low glycemic load, low glycemic index, things that don't spike our blood sugar, that don't cause A1C to go up, that don't cause fasting insulin to increase. And those are what we call low glycemic load diets. And generally, what did they look like? They're diets that are lower in, as you mentioned earlier, in these readily available carbohydrates that are highly processed that get broken down into sugar too quickly. So these would be minimally processed whole foods types of diets, the things that you have spoken brilliant to. Dr. Mark Hyman has done an eloquent job in getting people to recognize the vegan type of diet approach, which is to use lean cuts of meat, organically processed, a lot of whole grains, fruits and vegetables, staying away from gluten and other highly processed grain type of products. And for us, as you and I spoke about in our previous discussion, we just happened on to a discovery of something that had a 2,500-year history, 2,500-year history in human nutrition that got lost in America about 200 years ago, which is one of these unique blood sugar normalizing foods called Himalayan tartary buckwheat. And when we got onto this, it was like one of those coincidences, serendipities. Now I'm thinking back, maybe it wasn't a serendipity. Maybe it was because I was hanging out with some interesting people that were really worried about these issues of immune aging. And what we now recognize is that there are certain foods that have a series of ingredients within them, a series of substances that are made by their genes that help protect those plants against aging. Because our plants have immune systems, it turns out. And our plants have the same kind of problems that we have. They're manifest in slightly different ways, so I don't want to make it seem that the same. You don't see white blood cells circulating around in plants. But plants have an innate immune system, and they have an adaptive immune system like we do. And it interrelates with their immune protective substances that they make, which are called plant phytochemicals that are there to strengthen their own immune systems. So when we start looking at certain plant foods, we say, whoa, maybe there are some super immune rejuvenating foods that are tied directly into the counterpoint against this immune aging foods that we just talked about.
So we'll talk about the Himalayan tartary buckwheat in a second, but that sort of opens up this larger category, which is the importance of phytochemicals in our diet, and in particular, these polyphenols, which you've been such a big champion of for such a long time. So we've increasingly done more episodes with different experts that are out there, and this word keeps on coming up. Talk about the role of phytochemicals and polyphenols in our diet, and how does it actually look when we start to have a lot more of them in frequency, which supports all of the processes of normal, or what we call healthy aging.
Yeah, thank you. So let's first just quickly define what we mean by phytochemicals. So that's PHYTO. So they're plant-derived substances. Where do they come from? The genes of plants carry the information that is necessary for the plant to do its work. And it turns out that depending upon what that plant is, some reasonably large amount of its genes are dedicated to the production of these secondary substances called phytochemicals. Now, it turns out, this is a little factoid that's interesting, the human being has somewhere around, say, 25,000 genes in our genome. A rice plant has 70,000 genes. So what's more sophisticated, a rice or a human? I'll let that question open for discussion. But all I do know is that a lot of those genes in that rice, the whole rice, as with many other vegetable products, is dedicated to the production of these phytochemicals because they require their own messaging system for them to be made within the plant. Now, of those phytochemicals, they can be broken down into many different families. I'm not going to go through a whole discussion of the library of phytochemicals, but to say that people who are engaged in this process of discovering and looking at these have found thousands and thousands of different phytochemicals in different plants. By the way, there's another factoid. There are over 20,000 edible plant foods today in the planet, of which humans derive 90% of their calories from 6.
Can you list those 6 just for everybody who's not familiar with that?
Okay, so maybe we should
They'll
do it together.
Know it once you'll say it. But
okay, so it's rice,
Yep.
It's wheat, it's corn, it's oats, it's, what am I missing here? Corn, soy.
Mm-hmm.
How do I get it? I'm in 5 now?
Rice, corn, wheat, soy.
Okay. And let's see.
With lettuce or...
sorghum, and let's see, what's the 6th?
It'll come back to you.
Yeah, it will. So if we really look at the first three, particularly in the United States with corn, in fact, it's interesting to note, studies have been done and published over the last few years saying that in a human being living in the United States, that the carbon atoms that make us up, which is the principal element that makes up our body's protein, carbohydrate, and fat, of those carbon atoms, 60% or more come from corn.
Wow.
So
people are walking around and they're basically
we're walking corn, and we're walking generally hybridized, genetically engineered corn.
Yeah,
that's a whole nother story. So anyway,
once you understand that, then a lot of other stuff starts to make sense.
It is an interesting theater of exploration, that's for sure. So let's go back to phytochemicals. So there's thousands of different phytochemicals, probably more than 10,000. And so if you go to the 20,000 edible plant foods, of which we eat 90% of our calories as humans in 6 or fewer, then we're not carrying into our diets many of these phytochemicals that are accessible in all these plant foods. Now, you might say, well, who cares? I mean, when I go to a nutrition textbook, I don't find many pages that are dedicated to phytochemicals. It doesn't seem like it's that big of a topic, because these are not essential like vitamins, are they? I mean, can you die of a acute disease from not getting enough of a polyphenol? And the answer is no, you probably won't immediately die. So it's not like scurvy that you could die from no vitamin C, or beriberi from no vitamin B1. But over the course of a lifetime, the subtle effects of having no phytochemicals in your diet increases the risk of virtually every chronic age-related disease.
And can you connect that dot of like, exactly how? What are the organ systems, or what's happening in the body that's just not working as well as it should be because those phytochemicals and polyphenols are not present?
So, Drew, you're brilliant, because one of the major discoveries of the last decade is that the role these phytochemicals have. It used to be said, well, they're antioxidants, so they tend to help cells from being oxidatively injured. But now, no, that's not the real explanation. They're not just like preventing rancidity of the body. They are actually regulating how the genes of cells express themselves through this epigenetic modulation process, particularly in the immune system. So these polyphenols have specific activity, these certain members of the phytochemical family that are found in berries and green leafy vegetables and certain whole seeds. These polyphenols have specific effects on regulating the rejuvenation of our immune system. And so if you take them out, then you start aging your immune system. So here is a full circle. We've just gone back now 360 to where we started, talking about immune age as a measure of your overall health trajectory and probably your life expectancy.
This is why we've probably seen individuals like Dr. Kara Fitzgerald, who did her study last year and was published in the Journal of Aging, I believe. A big part of her protocol of reducing people's biological age in 8 weeks included exactly what you were talking about. A lot of whole foods that were in there, minimizing grains, I think she did in hers. The inclusion of a lot of high-quality polyphenols that are part of the diet, including things like tea and rosemary and other stuff. These things have a tangible impact, and there's got to be a reason. If we look back at our ancestors, depending on what tradition people come from, there's a reason why these foods were really thought of as medicine. There was something that they knew that their bodies got when they included them, and something that they knew that their bodies didn't get, or what they would be at more risk of when they had the absence of these. This is why we've fought probably so many wars for spices and, all these different things we've done throughout human history, is because we knew how important these foods were to the functioning of our immune systems in our body.
Yeah, I think you're saying it very, very well, that in the end, why people ultimately have selected certain diets is it ties back into their felt state. How did they actually do as human beings eating certain foods over time? And that's why the cultural history of Ayurvedic medicine, or the cultural history of traditional Chinese medicine, is so interesting, because it used the experiences of observation over thousands of years to kind of codify how certain foods track against certain functions, felt states in the individual. And it became a part of a different way of conceiving a medical system. The medical system was built on observational empiricism of how certain foods and spices and herbs would connect to certain functional felt states in the individuals from which the pharmacopoeia was developed versus molecular mechanisms for individual molecules in a drug-based culture as we have in the United States in our medicine.
So you hinted at a little bit, and you guys have been a huge part of bringing this particular plant to America for folks. And Dr. Mark Hyman, my business partner, he's been a huge fan of that. I'm a huge fan of it too. But you talked a little bit about the story of how you connected with the Himalayan tartary buckwheat. And I want to chat about that for a second. So first is, give us the origin. You talked about a 2,600 year history.
About 2,500
years ago. Tell us a little bit about this ancient plant and how are people using it in the region that it grew in?
Yeah, thank you. So let's first talk about the word Tartary buckwheat. Why Tartary? What's that mean? Well, it turns out the Tartan district of China is where this was first found. And so it was called Tartary buckwheat. Now, let me first say that I don't know who stuck the name buckwheat on these things, because this is not a wheat. It has no relationship genetically at all with wheat or any other of the grasses. It's actually a fruit seed.
A fruit seed.
Yes.
But so it is the seed of a fruit. Can you eat the fruit as well?
Well, that is the fruit.
That is the fruit.
Exactly. Okay. The fruit is the seed.
Okay,
so, and it looks like when you grow it in the field, it's a very logy plant, very tall and rangy. It's actually beautiful when it's blossoming in the spring. But it looks entirely different than wheat because it's not related to any of the grains. It's actually not a grain. And that, by the way, is true for common buckwheat as well. There are two kinds of buckwheat, two different genotypes. One is the Phagopyrum form, which is the Phagopyrum that is common buckwheat. And then there's the Tataricum, which is the Tartary buckwheat. Now, why do we call it Himalayan Tartary buckwheat? Because it turns out of the Tartary buckwheat, there are two varieties of that. One that was associated with the kind of the foothills and the mid-altitudes of the Himalayan mountains, and the other is more southern form that was kind of a warmer climate kind of Tartary buckwheat. It turns out that the colder, more hostile Tartary buckwheat, what we call Himalayan, had to survive over millennia in hostile conditions. So it was naturally selected to have really strong immune systems in those plants. So it has the highest level of these immune strengthening phytochemicals. Now, it turns out if you ask, well, what does that mean, the highest levels? Common buckwheat, which is already known to have pretty high levels of polyphenols, particularly rutin and quercetin, if you compare it to our Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, we have 50 to 100 times as much, not percent, times, 50 to 100 times.
Of total polyphenols.
Of these immune active polyphenols.
Okay, got it.
So it is a little like immune factory producing these metabolites that are called these polyphenols. Now, why did it get lost in American agriculture? That's a really interesting question. It turns out that this grain, or this non-grain, this seed, found its way to Northern Europe in cold climates there. Because of its hardiness, it doesn't require fertilizer, it doesn't require pesticides, herbicides. Bugs don't like it because it's so high in these natural immune active substances, bugs won't eat it. And so it was a really great thing for hostile climates and poor soils. It actually even has an aluminum detoxifying capability in aluminum-rich soils. So then, because of its hardiness, it ended up being one of the original products brought to the New World in the colonies. And it was a colonial food.
And how were they preparing it, or what were they making it in?
Yeah, it can be made, into breads. It can be made into crackers. It can be boiled and made into cereals.
And is that how they were having it in its sort of the native communities in the Himalayas that were consuming it?
Yeah.
Were they making it in that form?
They make these things that are, I found when I was over there once, that look like funnel cones. And so they wrap it into a tubular structure. And because this is so impervious to bugs growing on it, you don't have to refrigerate or anything. And so people would then put it in their packs and going out hunting or a long distance, and they would just chew on this, as kind of a major source of food. And it's interesting because it turns out that it's very high in protein, and the protein is very abundant in the essential amino acids. It's high in omega-3 fatty acids. It's very high in B vitamins. It's high in zinc, magnesium, in trace minerals. So you could actually live solely on Tartary buckwheat.
Wow.
It's one of the complete foods, not even to mention all the polyphenols. So it is a unique food that was brought over again by our colonial ancestors, and then it got lost about 200 years ago. To the point that we could only find, 4 years ago when we got interested in this, we could only find one place where it was being grown in the United States. And that was a hobby farmer. There was a former ag research professor from Cornell University living in upstate New York that he and his wife, who was a nurse, they both had retired and wanted to do something fun on a little hobby farm. And so they got these seeds from the USDA and they planted them. They turned out to be Himalayan Tartary buckwheat. He really liked the looks of the flowers. And so he and his wife became kind of Himalayan Tartary buckwheat aficionados. His wife then, and he put together a little artisanal mill with 100-year-old equipment that they reconditioned. And then they started selling this flour in roadside stands in upstate New York.
For people to make bread and things like that?
They had a whole series of recipes.
Wow.
And so we were introduced then to, his name is Sam Beer. We were introduced to him thanks to my associate Trish Urey. And that led now into a 4-year extraordinary relationship we've shared. He's really taught us about buckwheat, Tartary buckwheat, and to the extent that we now have recently, with Big World Health, purchased his company, which is Angelica Farms, which was the only place having Tartary buckwheat available in the United States on a commercial level. He only had about 10 acres, by the way. So we now have a whole series of organic farmers that are part of our cooperative that Mr. Beer introduced us to. And now we have the only organically certified Himalayan Tartary buckwheat ever produced in the United States. So
that's incredible.
It's been an interesting run.
Would you be okay with the label that somebody thought of Himalayan Tartary buckwheat as a superfood, meaning it's an additional thing that somebody added on top of a base of a healthy diet that you explained earlier?
I think it depends on how a person wants to integrate it within their lifestyle, because we now have a food lab that's developing recipes and menu plans around Tartary buckwheat, in which you can develop savory items or you can develop sweet items that it can be made into many different varieties. But as we know, not everybody is a master of the kitchen. In our world of today, people are looking for quick and convenient. So I think that I would call it, in the way that it's being used right now, more as a superfood to augment the characteristics of other good foods that a person is including in their diet to get this added value of these immune strengthening phytochemicals.
Yeah. And just to zoom out further, just to make sure the audience is following along, we really were talking about a list of things that can be supportive, that can be promoting healthy aging, which again, we don't see a lot of in this day and age. We see a lot of chronic disease. We see a lot of inflammaging. And one of the things that you were talking about is, of course, the dietary components and some of the list on that. I have some more questions around that. And then the next thing is this, Himalayan Tartary buckwheat, which is really a fruit and a seed together. That is really another way of introducing these super polyphenols into our diet in a way that people really haven't had access to for a long time. And so that's another one. And we'll come back to Himalayan Tartary buckwheat in a second. Are there other things that would be on that list that would also be part of the process of slowing down, for layman's terms, and just using in this language over here that for the podcast? Would there be other things, lifestyle factors, food, ways of going about living that are also a super important part of slowing down the aging process? Yes,
I think the other one that we've only a little alluded to, that is another part of this autophagy, garbage collecting, rejuvenation process, is sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And sleep hygiene. And, isn't it interesting? I think both of us have been so amazed to see how sleep we were in dormancy related to the power of sleep. And then we had people like Satyananda Panda and Matt Walker, who started to do this brilliant science on sleep and circadian rhythms and eating frequency. And all of this brought us into recognizing that time and how we use time, sometime in restoration, like sleep, is such an important part of our rejuvenation process. And so I think the combination of Sach Panda's work on time frequency of eating, this time-restricted eating, and that of Matt Walker around sleep hygiene, because it's all around how we use time, isn't it? Sometimes taking a rest is really regenerative because it allows your body to catch up with itself, because you've got all these processes that are there to work on your behalf. But if they're being overtaxed because you're in a state of inflammaging and you've got so much debris that you can't clear the house, then you never get caught up and you're always working on a deficit, which is that of aging. If you have time to catch up, your body has those processes that will do work for you, even when you're asleep, to do central nervous system housekeeping.
It's like almost if, sleep is so important that even if for some reason somebody couldn't make gradual steps in their lifestyle to improve their diet, right? Just even getting more sleep, if they had an unhealthy relationship with sleep, that alone would do tremendous benefits for them.
Absolutely.
And of course, we can do both in this day and age. It's no reason that we only have to focus on one, but that's how important sleep is it's so central to the process of immunorejuvenation.
Well, and I think you also implied, and I totally agree, that it's a detoxifying component of your body. Your body has to find ways to get rid of the burden of toxins. And we've talked about toxins are not just molecules. They can be thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs. They can be things that imprint your epigenome that your body needs time to get rid of, to detoxify. And sleep is one of those processes where you get activation of these mechanisms whereby you're cleansing some of these toxic debris from experiences to allow you to rebuild new.
So you've chatted about sleep. What about this category that you've been really putting a spotlight on, which are the healthy stressors that we can build into our life? And what are some examples of those healthy stressors? And can those be a part of this slowing down of the aging process?
Yes, thank you. And I think there's two parts of that story. One is the word hormesis or hormetic, and the other is episodic. So let's put those two words together, because I think they are guiding principles for all of us in how we can engage in rejuvenating our immune and nervous systems. So first, let's talk about hormesis. What does that mean, hormetic? Hormetic is a word that refers to something we're exposed to, or a system is exposed to, at a low level that is a higher than expected effect. So it's something that stimulates or catalyzes a bigger effect than you might expect from the process itself. So what would be a good example of nutritional hormesis? It's probably these bioflavonoids or these polyphenols in our diet. You don't have to, the concept of a little is good, a whole lot more is better is probably not right. It's the right level, probably in the order of a couple thousand milligrams in our diet a day, not taking 10 grams a day or 10,000 milligrams a day, because our body works best when it's stimulated by a few of these hormetic chemicals, phytochemicals, not a pharmacological dose. So small is good. Small is stimulating. Small is activating. Too much is suppressing. It goes the other direction. So that's hormetic. Now, what's the other one? Episodic. Episodic, it turns out that the body most likes to regenerate and rejuvenate itself when it has a chance to pulse, like sprint, and then rest. Pulse, like sprint, and then rest. It likes episodic rhythms. Our body is a rhythmic organism. It's a rhythm with the tides. It's a rhythm with the lunar cycles. It's a rhythm with the solar cycles. And it likes those episodic rhythmic relationships. So it doesn't like just doing one exercise extensively all the time. It likes, kind of varied exercise, sometimes to the max and sometimes simple, sometimes not fatiguing, sometimes just restful. And so the concept of episodic coupled with hormetic is a pattern for designing a healthy lifestyle. And if you look at centenarians who are healthy and ask, gee whiz, did you just get the good luck of the genes? Well, some of them probably had good luck of the genes, but many of them had embraced and endorsed a lifestyle that was both hormetic and episodic in the way that they undertook their daily living. So they didn't have a stress-free life, but it wasn't chronic stress all the time. They had episodic stress. And some of that stress was positive, what I call exaltative stress, stress power, not distress, stress injury. So I think all of these things fit together in design of the principles of living. Not doing one thing the same all the time at max. That's probably not a good idea. Doing things pulsed and variety. And, Dr. Deanna Minich talks about eating of the rainbow and trying to get as many foods of color in different variations in your diet as you can. So you're not just eating, well, I'm going to have carrots every day because I love carrots. Or I'm just going to have broccoli every day because I heard that's good for me. It's finding ways of vary the information that your body's receiving, both in the amount and the frequency.
So you've chatted a bunch about what that looks like for the diet, diversity in the diet, again, inclusion of these super high quality polyphenols like Himalayan tartary buckwheat. What are some of the other components that you feel are kind of like sleep? We were sleeping on the power of sleep for such a long time. Nobody was really talking about it. What do you think is getting a little bit more attention now that you feel like could be a healthy form of a lifestyle stressor that people can incorporate? Obviously, there's a lot of conversation about exercise. Do you have a prescription of how you talk to folks about how they should be thinking about incorporating that into their lifestyle?
Yeah, I'd say that minimum of half an hour a day for everybody of moving where your pulse gets up above resting. Doesn't have to necessarily see the upper limit of training to be doing you good. And there's good data from the Nurses Health Study showing that regular walking program that just gets your pulse rate 20 or 30 beats per minute elevated has a significant benefit both in longevity and immune function. So now, does that mean exercising a little more? Couldn't you get more benefit? Yes, but it gets to the diminishing returns until you get to over-exercise, which has a negative effect on your immune system.
How do you feel about things like hot exposure, cold exposure?
Okay, there you go. So there's another one, frequency and variety, right? And duration. So it's interesting, isn't it? There's some cultures that say, well, saunas are fantastic. And then there are other cultures that say cold plunging are fantastic. Well, actually, from my experience in Finland, it's a combination of cold plunging and saunas, isn't it? So you take a sauna and then you take a dip in the cold water. I recall several experiences actually in Sweden and Finland and visiting friends up there where the sauna was wood fired. It was right there on the edge of a little lake, and we'd break the ice and jump in, afterwards. So again, we're talking about this ability of the body to respond to change because it strengthens our rejuvenation process, our renewal process.
You had mentioned previously that you took a methylation test to get a sense of your biological age. When you first tested, your biological age was 69. Your actual age, you said, is 77?
Was 75 at that time.
75 at the time. Mm-hmm. And then you went on a program and a protocol, and then you went back and you tested how many months later on?
About 6 months later.
About 6 months later on, you were working with a group of researchers in this, and they saw the biggest difference that they had ever seen from somebody that came in, and you had come all the way down into your 50s. What was it again?
54.
54. So you've been talking a lot about the principles, maybe even a few things that you actually did in it, but put that program together for us. Like what did it actually look like? What did you do? What were you eating? And what did your day-to-day life look like?
Yeah, thank you. So the first thing I'd have to do as a qualifier, as a condition of this discussion is that the only benefit that I can think of from COVID was that we're all at home. And for me, who has traveled 6 million miles, more than 6 million miles in my life, that was a unique adult experience for me. I had not been constrained to being home for that many months and not even leaving the house except to go to the store periodically, probably since I was a kid. So the benefit then, not to focus on the horrible things that we all recognize occur during that period, but the benefit was I could really do stuff and I didn't have any outside variations of
You had
doing.
a lot of time.
And I didn't have travel, didn't have airports, didn't have hotels, same home, same environment every day. So with that, there was also no excuse not to stay on the program, right? And so I think that was an advantage to me over those months that I was really on the program without deviation. It was a routine. It became a good habit. So that meant for me about an hour of exercise a day, religiously. That meant every day really getting to bed at the right time, getting up at the right time, not having a lot of change in time zones, which I'm been doing for decades. And so every morning, every night, getting to bed by 10:30, every morning getting up by 7 o'clock. So, it's tracking my sleep tracker with my wearables and using those as guides to how I was fitting into my plan. And then, of course, being able to make our own meals every day. No more restaurants. I don't think we went to a restaurant for months. And so that then allowed me to really stick on the program that our Food Lab people were designing around this immunorejuvenation diet approach with a high phytochemical rich diet. And then lastly, I think was the ability to really, I'd have to say all the stress I had, other than the worry about all these people that were seriously ill from COVID, was positive stress in some respect about what could I do to help people. And so it got me into podcasting for the first time. It got me into social media for the first time and getting feedback and to recognize that maybe I had a value proposition that my years of experience could provide to others. So that was a positive stress because I was able to see that even though I was isolated and insulated, I was still able to make some contributions to other people's lives, hopefully in a positive way. So I consider that a positive stress. So
really it sounds like focusing on the basics.
Absolutely.
But having that regular routine around the basics.
Precisely.
But on the dietary side, because I know a lot of people would be wondering, when you're making these meals at home, what kind of protocol are you following? Are you eating plant-based? Are you eating a combination of things? And how are the practical ways, in addition to maybe a little bit of supplementation here and there, but how are the practical ways that you're making sure that you incorporate these incredible polyphenols into your diet on a daily basis?
Well, first of all, during this period of time, I wrote an article about why I believe that Dr. Hyman's concept of the Pekin diet makes sense from a scientific perspective. I reviewed the literature, talked about the nature of what we've learned about the varieties of different diets that I've seen over my nearly 50 years in the field. I've seen all sorts of diet fads come and go. And the fundamental concepts that Mark was talking about in his book that underscore the Pekin diet, based on the scientific information we have right now about diet relationships to health, makes sense. And so for me, it was a modified Mediterranean-style diet that was, I think, under the rubric of what he would call Pekin. I wasn't focusing on trying to be keto. I wasn't focused on trying to be gluten-free. I wasn't focused on trying to be in a fasting state. I did introduce time-restricted feeding. That was the other thing I didn't mention that I really stayed with very religiously. I stopped having meals or food after about 7:30 at night. I didn't eat again until noon or 1 o'clock the next day. And I did that routinely throughout that whole period of time. So that's another variable that I think I want to put into the mix of changes that I made, because that's very hard to do when you're traveling all the time to stay on that kind of schedule. But I could really religiously stay on it during that period. And so to me, and I wrote a series of articles on what we've learned about the modified Mediterranean diet, because it is very high in phytochemicals, and particularly if you use virgin olive oil or triple virgin with a lot of the oleopurines and the phytochemicals that are found in olives. All of these play a role in modulating these autophagic processes associated with rejuvenation.
A question that I have for you is that I've known you for now quite some time. We've been fortunate to be friends for pretty much since like 2008. I think 2009 is the first time I got a chance to meet you. I've always seen you as somebody who's so mission driven, wanting to make an impact. You really know why you're here on the planet. And probably a big source of joy for you is traveling and meeting people, which is why you've put on so many of these miles over the years.
Yeah.
And looking for different ways to create opportunity where everybody gets a chance to win. Now, naturally with that in life, our diet and our sleep and things are going to be thrown off a little bit. We do the best that we can along the journey, but it's not like we're going to be on that same protocol that you were at home where you're every day following the same routine. And I guess my question is that I know that there was a difference that you made in your biological clock, and that is something that people want, and that's a good motivator to know that you actually can do that. But were you basically you were happy then, and you're kind of happy now that you're traveling, and you don't. Part of what I feel like I see on you, I guess this is how I should set it up. Part of what I feel like I see on you is that even when you're not prescriptively following an exact routine, you're still happy, and you don't judge yourself if you have to modify your lifestyle a little bit here and there, because how you live your life is a big part of the joy that you get from showing up in the world. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. And one of the things that I made a decision early on, knowing that my life was going to be very travel dense and that I was going to be with all sorts of different cultures around the globe and having interesting meals at different times, like 3 o'clock in the morning when we were dealing with our group in China. Often we would go to the restaurant at 2 in the morning. So what I recognized that I needed, if this was going to be kind of part of a life stream, I needed to have this balance point, which was I needed to find a safe island to get back to home, right? Home, I'm talking about ecological home, not necessarily home as an address in the mailbox. And so I think we chose a pastime. When I look back, and this goes back now over 25 years, that was really smart for my archetype. And that was we chose a hobby called boating. And boating in the Pacific Northwest is where I live in the Seattle area, turns out to open up an opportunity to be with nature, 50,000 islands between Seattle and Southeast Alaska, probably more than 50,000, but at least 50,000, and to find a place to get back home, because you need to have an emotional grounding. You need a place to do your own emotional detox. You need a chance to consolidate all those thoughts. You can't do this 365 continuously, I believe, and maintain some kind of balance. So that's part of my own hormetic program, is to balance this out. And I took, with my wife and family at times, the pause of sometimes a couple of weeks or more to be in the wild on the boat with just nature. I mean, I can recall several times going 2 weeks not seeing another person, plane, car, or boat, just us with animals in Alaska. So, you don't have to do that specifically, but things that give balance to get back home, to go to home base, and to get things consolidated before you pack up your gear and get back on the road again. I think these are parts of the rhythm of life that gives you a chance to hopefully be at your best in many different circumstances. And that is, I think, is part of, fortunately, a program that I elected to follow in my life probably about over 30 years ago.
I think it's an important subject to talk about, because when people listen to podcasts all day, especially if they're newer to this world, it can feel, from listening to the individuals that are talking, the host and then the expert in your case, that they have it all figured out and that they do the things that they talk about all the time. And really, it's actually that you don't even want to do those things necessarily all the time. There are foundational elements. Like, I'm sure you know that if you don't get a few days of good sleep in a row, you're going to be thrown off. You know how to catch that early. You know how to correct it. So it's not like we want to live recklessly, but that there is a rhythm and season to life. There's a time and place for everything. And most importantly, I think that we become masters of ourself, our life, and our body when we also don't judge ourselves for not adhering too strictly to whatever protocol we have. And then when we get the opportunity, we can get back to that protocol and go back to the roots that we've established for ourselves. The challenge becomes when you've never tasted it, so you don't know how good you can feel, and you also don't know how to catch the moments where you've fallen so off track, and then later on chronic disease ends up developing. But for a lot of people, I think that their lives would actually be better if they had to choose between dialing in their diet another 10%, let's say for most of the listeners of this podcast, which is different than the general population, or if they would benefit from investing in, a best friend, because right now they don't have a best friend that they can go do some hobbies with, they may be better off investing in that best friend and having some more joy in their life. Yeah. Again, not that it has to be one or the other. It's just an important way to contextualize this conversation, that prioritizing balance, as you mentioned, and joy, and not judging yourself is an important part of the equation.
I think that was almost a drop your mic summary. It was a brilliant review. People, all of us have the choice to kind of decide what is the greatest value proposition that we want to explore in our lives. I mean, maybe for some people it would be climbing Everest, or another person it might be running a personal best marathon. Another person it could be many things, becoming a piano virtuoso, learning how to be a really great computer programmer, whatever it might be. Those things that we establish as our primary foci to be the fullest that we can be, to be the best that we can be, have to be integrated within the scope of, are we on a sprint or are we on a marathon? Is life a sprint or a marathon? Because we often see that individuals who have maximized one principle in their life by full intention, if you go downstream in their lives, it's not so good thereafter. It's like, that was it, and now where do I go from here? I'm lost. Because they have not explored a boundary of places where their joy can be fulfilled that is not necessarily tied to one single point in time, one specific attribute, one specific focus. And I think that construct of being the best you can, does that mean being the best you can in total over a 100-year lifetime? Or does that mean the best you can be by the age of 30 and then everything else is they'll take the hindmost? So I think these are really important questions that we each address in our lives as to how we pace ourselves and describe how we're going to perform.
At the beginning of this, when you sat down, before we started recording, we were chatting a little bit about principles that we live our lives behind, things that drive us. And in the context of everything that you guys are doing at Big Bold Health, everything that you want to focus on, and you've called it the pay it forward period of your life, talk about some of those principles and how they shape the legacy that you want to get a chance to leave. You have many, many more years of life left to live, in the way that you're thinking about your life. I think the audience could get some benefit from hearing about it.
Well, thanks. So let's talk about a specific example to show you how that has worked for me. And I don't want to extrapolate that this would necessarily be the way other people will work, but this has worked for me. So I mentioned we have this hobby called boating, and it's taken my wife and I about 30,000 miles together on our boats up to Alaska numerous times. And so we were up there one time, and this boat came in, it was Sitka actually. This boat came into the harbor. It was a very unusual looking boat. And I went over and talked to the skipper of the boat and was explaining how I hadn't seen a boat like that. And he said, oh, well, if you think this is interesting, the owner of this boat, who designed this boat, is coming in, and you could come over and talk with him. Well, I did. And it was a fascinating discussion because it turned out he had been a trained marine architect at University of Michigan, and he and his wife, who were both from Michiganders, and had come out to Seattle kind of in a gap summer before they started into his career life to do fishing up in Alaska with a fishing company. He found he loved it. And so he said, hey, I'm going to just get into the fishing industry. So ultimately, he developed these unique fishing boats where no one is above deck. They're all below deck. The fish comes in, one fish on a line, a hook and line, all caught individually, no bycatch. They're processed within 15 minutes of a live fish. They go into minus 10-degree freezers to completely retain all the nutritional benefit and flavor value of the fish like it was wild and fresh. And so I said, well, that's cool. So what do you, what issues do you have? And he said, well, the biggest issue is unfortunately, when we do this, we have to throw about 25% of the fish away, which we can't find a commercial market for. And I said, well, what's that? And he says, well, it's the guts. And I said, so what's in the guts of the fish? He said, what do you mean what's in the guts? I said, well, like, what are the biomolecules in the guts? He looked at me very funny. He said, Jeff, I'm a fisherman. I'm not a chemist. And I said, I'm a chemist and not a fisherman. Why don't you send me some of those guts? So when he did it, I was able to, in our lab, get it analyzed. And it turned out there were some really interesting, valuable molecules that we could probably get out of that with different simple technologies to make that so we wouldn't throw it away. We could have value. And one of those were a series of fatty acid compounds, including so-called pro-resolving mediators, or PRMs, that were found in the oil components of these fish guts. And so we eventually then formed a partnership. We built a plant. We got the state of Alaska to give us a grant for education of Alaskan Native men and women to become TIM techs. We have now a facility with a school and health services there.
Wow.
And we started producing this oil from fish guts. Now, what does that have to do with my principles? It's exactly aligned with my principles, because what I established were that there were 5 things that I should guide my life on. Number one, these are, not, by the way, no necessary order of priority, just 5 principles. Number one is I was not obligated to work any longer with anyone I didn't like to work with. Now, in my earlier life, did I find that there were times by expediency I had to work with people who I really didn't like? Yes, I did. So I said, okay, I don't have to do that anymore. And this gentleman has become a good friend of mine. Number 2, I would only do things that had what I considered social value. There was no reason to do anything other than things that had social value and had a goodness factor associated with it. And so I would ask, well, were there times in my earlier life where I had to kind of make some value decisions and maybe sometimes do things that were not exactly in the mainstream of my goodness factor, but I just was obligated to do it? Yes. So I don't have to do that anymore. Number 3, I had to prioritize relationships as the most important thing. So I had to find better ways of balancing family, friends, and associations by rejiggering my time and scaling and allocation of the most precious thing that we have, which is our time, which once we lose it, it's gone. And I've been trying to stay on that track and make those changes. Number 4, I had to make sure that what I was doing had a legacy value that could resource or leverage some of the equity that I had been fortunate to develop over my 60, 70 years of living, so that I could hand it off as a baton to others that could maybe use some of this and take it forward from there. And then lastly, number 5, I had to recognize that time was limited, and therefore I had to make decisions based upon the fact that it was not infinite. I could not do all things, that my value proposition had to be around the first 4 principles, and anything else that took my time away from that, there had to be a word no associated with it, which I was not really good at. I was really good at yes. I was not so good at no. And then I asked my family, I kind of wrote this down in the 5 principles of living, and I said, hey, here's my charter, my personal charter, but I need some help because some of these things are not my normal and usual behaviors. And so I'm going to have to learn new behaviors, and I need them to be reinforced. So you need to call me out. Hopefully you'll do it in a gentle way when you see me deviating from one or more of these principles. And so I've had a few cases where they've said things like, Dad, you're off principles. So it's a recorrection opportunity. But those have become the guiding principles that I would like to think pave the way for whatever the year's future might look like.
I love it. I love that story because I think everybody can relate in their own life, and usually major milestones. And I believe that you shared that after the acquisition of your last company that you had, that was kind of like a real opportunity and a celebration in one sense, but also an awareness of what sacrifices had to go into achieving that acquisition. You know, it's hard to build a company that is big enough that somebody wants to buy and do that. And of course, there's things that you had to sacrifice along the way. And then the orientation of, well, what do I want life to look like now from here? So anybody who's in a transitionary period who's listening is also thinking about, how do I want to orient myself? What is my North Star? And if we don't take the opportunity to write it down, or at least if you're not great at writing it down, or it's a little scary for you, just talking it out with a friend and having them ask good questions so that you can be aware. I find that I often don't even know sometimes how I feel about something until I start talking it out to somebody else. Yeah. And a good listener will ask you good questions, and you'll get a chance to actually hear yourself think for the first time and note those North Stars down and see what you start to put together, because that's going to help shape how you move forward from here. And just getting a chance to observe you before that transitionary moment, and now building a company with your family and friends and other stuff, it's really beautiful to watch. And I just want to applaud you for having the courage to say, like, here are the things that I stand for, and this is what I want more of, and this is what I want less of in my life.
Well, thank you, Drew. And I want to turn it back to you and say I think you do that very, very well. And I don't think you have to be at the end of your career. You know, for me at 76, the days forward is certainly less than the days behind. I think you can actually do what you're talking about at all phases in different capacities, in which you take an inventory and you say, how much sacrifice am I making of my core principles to get to what I consider my objectives? And is the trade-off net positive? Or am I just doing it because it seems like a routine and it's an expectation of me? And I think those periodic reviews, a personal inventory, some people call that a vision quest or whatever it might be. It doesn't require a complete change of your life. But I think it's a really healthy part of, again, getting rid of toxins, because some of our behaviors we let slip in are just like chemicals in the environment. They become toxic to us really being fully complete and having joy in our lives.
Jeff, before we wind down here and tell people how they can find more about your company and the work that you guys are doing, anything else that you feel like we didn't talk about that you wanted to shine a light on?
Well, I think the only thing that I want to make sure we underline, underscore, an exclamation point is the concept that we are in charge of our own lives. You know, this construct that we are a victim or that we have somebody to blame often holds us back from really making the changes that are available to us to be as remarkably joyful and celebratory as we deserve. And what I would say to most people is that in those conversations you were describing with other people where you're having what my good friend Michael Leiner used to call to me, say, Jeff, are you having discussions with people or are you having get real conversations? And get real conversations are where you can strip away a lot of the stuff and you get down to the core issues and you're willing to put yourself into vulnerability with people that obviously you feel safe with to explore these things that are at the boundaries of scariness. Because maybe you didn't want to have to go into that conversation and because it might open up all sorts of things that you have to do and you kind of were willing to stay with mediocrity. And I think that these concepts that we are in charge of those decisions as to what doors we're willing and unwilling to open and close are really important as part of this rejuvenation process, the general sense of rejuvenating. Our immune systems, to go back to immunity, are reflective of our general state of how we see, act, and respond to the world. That's what our immune systems do. So if we're down in the dumps, if we're under the blues, we're burdened by toxic thoughts and attitudes, beliefs, chemicals, bad diets, stress, and no sleep, our immune systems pick up that message and they'll continue reinforcing it. So we're in charge. We own it.
It's an empowering message and a great one to end on. I'd love for you to share how people can continue to follow the work of Big Bold Health and anything special that you have going on in your world.
Yeah, thanks. So obviously we have bigboldhealth.com and then we have jeffreybland.com. So you can either find me personally, that's JEFFREY bland.com, or bigboldhealth.com. I'm very excited about what we're doing at Big Bold Health because we are, I think, pioneering the concept of personalized immunity in ways that has not been done before. And we're trying to develop this community of people who see the gateway to health is by getting the most out of their immune system, because it's the not only the protection against infection, it's the activation of every cell, of every tissue, of every organ system to be its optimal functioning, resilient self. So I encourage people to check out bigboldhealth.com.
Amazing. And they can get the Himalayan tartary buckwheat there, and there's a bunch of recipes for like pancakes. Is there another favorite way that you enjoy making it?
Well, yeah, I think that there are several really great savory recipes that we have for individuals that want kind of things that they can put along with other vegetables and meat products. So I would say go to our recipe guides on our Big Bold Health website.
Can you add it to like bone broth, for example?
Oh, sure.
Is that something?
It's a thickener. It's been used because its high prebiotic fiber characteristics. It tends to thicken things, so it can be used in a roux or in a thickening sauce type of ingredient.
I'm going to try that tonight. I'm a huge bone broth fan, and I'm always making it. So I'm going to try adding a little bit. I have some flour at my place, so I'll try adding it in.
Awesome.
Dr. Bland, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing all your energy, your wisdom, and just super appreciate you and what your team are doing in this idea that we can win, but society can win, and the end consumer or the person listening on this podcast can win too. That's really a new approach that wasn't always there in human history because of scarce resources, etc., tribalism. But we're really mapping a new roadmap, and you guys are an example of it to create a different dynamic of how people relate to each other. So thank you for that.
Thank you for what you're doing. Really appreciate it. Our friendship means a lot, Drew. Thanks for the years.
Hey, YouTube, if you enjoyed what you just saw, keep watching for more great content on how to improve your brain and your life.